Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. As Valentine's approaches, many people look for ways they can express love and share love stories and, of course, love between each other. From time to time, as you remembered following us here over the many years of the Beyond 50 radio program, sometimes we like to find very unique stories that kind of shape and get us to understand what it means to be human. Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is author of the book, My Daughter, My Son. It's an adolescent's gender transition experienced by mother and child. This is about a couple, not the book itself, that is, but today is about the couple that met at the ages of 13 and 15 online, and one of them, being a female, changed to a male, and they had been happily married since And I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Mr. Luca. Luca, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today.
Hey, no problem. Thanks for the invite.
Now, obviously, the questions you've been asked over the years as you came to share this story are, what was going on back to the point where you decided to have this particular operation and change your sex from female to male?
Yeah, from a very early age, in preschool, in fact, I was experiencing body dysphoria. I knew that I was in the wrong body for how I internally felt my gender was, and I was presenting this from a very young age but didn't quite have the vocabulary yet. And as I was older and probably hit puberty is when it really came to a head that my body was changing in a way that was just wrong for how I felt inside, and I was having a lot of depression and anxiety from this, and it reached a point where I felt there was no point in living anymore if I couldn't be the gender I was meant to be, that I just couldn't find joy in anything. And I told my mother this when I was 13, and she initially had a hard time dealing with this. It was kind of a shock to her. This was back in the 90s. We didn't even know the word for it, didn't know where to get help. But she stuck by my side and defended me, stood up for me, and eventually got me talking to the right people. And when I was 15, she took me to New York to have the surgery to change genders. And at the time, I think, she was afraid, but I was really excited because I was ready to start my life.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know that as you and your wife now, you originally met online, and you actually came out in an email around 2000 to let her know, this is who I really am. How did you feel, or if there was a change in the nature of your relationship from the point of meeting 2 years before that to that particular point now? That must have been something kind of like a big one to swallow there, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, she knew that something was coming. When we first started talking online, she was 13, I was 15, and at this point, I hadn't had surgery yet, but I'd already been on hormone replacement therapy for 2 years. I'd had my name changed and been in the transition process. So she always knew me as male. She always knew me as Luca. That was my legal name at the time. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of not finding out for her that I wanted to change genders so much as finding that once upon a time I was a different gender. So it kind of changed the backstory of who I was, but wasn't going to affect who I was, now or who I would be in the future to her. And I think, I sent her an email to tell her this because I was pretty much a coward and was too afraid to tell her face-to-face or over the phone because I'd experienced a lot of rejection. But when you're teenagers, that's kind of to be expected, I think, when somebody hands you something like this. It's just so heavy and such a shock. And she reacted pretty positively, but, I found out years later, part of the reason why she was so like, oh, okay, it doesn't matter, I still love you, is that she was 15 when I told her, and I was 17, and she didn't really understand what it was. So I thought it was cute, she was like, I love you, it doesn't matter to me. And then, 5 years later, she finally told me, she's like, yeah, when you told me, I didn't really understand what that meant.
Now, you were married on Halloween in 2004, and my question would be, why on Halloween?
Oh, why not? I think we were just looking for something to do to celebrate the holiday. At the time, we'd been engaged for over a year, and we were waiting. It was very important to us. One of my best friends since elementary school is a lesbian, and she was, engaged to her partner. They'd been together for about 5 years, and I just didn't feel it would be right for me to get married until she could legally get married also, and we're from Massachusetts. So when my best friend married her wife, about a month later, I felt, okay, we can finally do this out of respect to her and our friendship. And we wanted to wait and have our wedding until we could afford to do it right and have our whole family there. But we were living, in a tiny apartment in Arizona. And basically, Charlotte, I owned her car because when we bought it, she was too young to get a loan. And the insurance company came to us and said, since you're not married but you own her car, it's costing you so much more a month that if you just were married, it could save you $50 a month off your insurance. And a marriage license only costs $55. So within a month, it paid for itself. And it was just kind of on a whim that we did this. But it worked out.
Now, what was that like, let's say, for her side of the family as this was beginning to kind of come out, if you will?
Yeah, her family, when we were initially engaged, and even up until, I think, maybe 2 years after our wedding in our apartment there in Arizona, they didn't know I was trans. That, I'd been to her house a number of times, and her whole family had come to Massachusetts to visit my family when we lived there still, and they just had no idea. Like, my parents weren't forthcoming with this. I wasn't. Her family was very religious and very conservative, and we were afraid how they would react to this news. And eventually, my wife did tell her mom. I think it might have been around 2005 or 2006. And at this point, her father had already passed away, so unfortunately, we never got to tell him. And I think that just last year, my wife finally told her cousins that I'm trans, but her extended family, her aunt, uncle, and grandparents don't know. But her mom, she seems okay with it. I think she might have been a little disappointed about the prospects for grandchildren now, but just given our personalities, I think that her mom had accepted that a long time ago, that Charlotte doesn't really have a penchant for motherhood anyway, so that probably wasn't going to happen either way. And she seems okay with it, though.
Now, I'm sure that you get asked a lot of questions, of the obvious ones about physical intimacy, and just as you brought up, Luca, about the possibility of having children. Now, that one I'm really kind of curious about. Is there that possibility? Let's say, for instance, the man who decides to change into a woman, physiologically speaking, and again, I don't look into a lot of this, it's usually out there in the news, but, it's like, well, whatever people decide to do, as long as they're happy, and that they, aren't bothering or hurting anybody, I say, hey, do it. But what is that like, is it possible for a transgender couple to have children, biologically speaking?
For a lot of couples, yes, it is. And then for a number of couples, no, it isn't. As you mentioned, people who decide to change genders, a lot of times they do this later in life. And I've met a lot of people who are trans, as well as people who are just, say, gay or lesbian, that didn't come out until, they'd already been married and had kids, and then finally decided that they needed to live their life as who they were meant to be. So I know a number of people who are transgendered that already have children from before they transitioned. And, good for them that they were able to do that. I've never met someone who had a kid that regretted it. But for other people in transition, a lot of things depend on hormones, and it depends on your partner. If a man was transitioning to female and was in a relationship with another biological woman, there could still be a point where they could conceive a child together. But, obviously if a man was transitioning to a woman and dating another man, they can't. And the same thing for someone like me, that up to a point in my transition, if I had been dating a man, we could have had a chance to conceive a child where I would have had to carry the child. But I'm attracted to women, and it's, pretty impossible right now for two women without outside help to conceive a child. And for me, that's not something I've ever been interested in. I know that a number of years ago there was a news story about a trans man who did get impregnated, and he carried a child to term, and I think that he was in a relationship with another woman, and I think that they now have two children, that he carried both of them. But that, just for me, that would be way beyond my comfort zone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And Charlotte, we talked years ago about the idea of her carrying a child, and it's, again, just not something that she feels comfortable with or is interested in. So right now, conceiving a child together, that's not really an option.
Now, Luca, this is, it's really a fascinating story, and I go back, this is, to me, my own little interesting story. When I first started in radio, I remember as a child growing up, there was the Sonny and Cher show. And I remember the first night they introduced their daughter, Chaz Bono, and I thought, oh, what a cute little girl, And then years went by, of course, the Sonny and Cher show went off the air, and you followed Cher from time to time, and that was about it. And then all of a sudden, as I was getting on the radio, and this was about 1998, I believe it was, and living in Portland, Oregon, she was to visit Powell's Books, and I thought, well, at the time, I wonder if there was a way I could catch her and get her on the program. I thought, this would be kind of cool. Not knowing what her life had been like from that little girl that I had seen so many years ago. And as I was telling a friend or two about this, I'm thinking about, getting Chastity Bono on the program here. They said, well, maybe you might want to discuss, her homosexuality. And I was, really? What? Kind of confused by that. Like, you just, you don't follow things too long. And now all of a sudden, she's in the news as a transgender, as Chaz Bono. And I thought, wow, that's kind of a transformation there. Now, in that particular point of view, with Hollywood and entertainment, you kind of wonder what goes on in a person's mind. Is it outside social pressures that might cause someone to become confused and change? Yours sounded to be more natural, like somehow inside you just knew, this isn't who I am. I don't feel comfortable about who I am in this body. This is what I should be. But what are your thoughts about something like that?
I think that is a great question, and it's a natural, relative question. Mm-hmm. It's been my experience that outside, pressures, peer pressure, social pressure, would have the opposite effect. That, in talking to other people, and for me in my own life, that the reason I was uncomfortable to come out, I knew from a very young age that something was wrong, but I was afraid to say something about it because of the negative, stigma. Even in kindergarten and grade school, I knew that not only would I be bullied and tormented, but that this would be difficult for my parents. And, you see stories about children who are disowned by their families just for being gay. So I imagine changing a gender would be worse. And I think that, I do think that social pressure plays a part, but I don't think it plays a part in getting someone to transition. I think it would be more the opposite, that it creates an element of fear, and that's why people are uncomfortable to come out. And I think that's how you end up with people who are gay and lesbian, that they'll come out until they're in their 40s, 50s, 60s. I mean, some of them are really late in life and have grandchildren even before they finally reach a point where they just want something in life for themselves, that they want a chance to experience the world and be seen for who they are and make those kind of relationships and friendships and connections. And when you're transgender, the difference between someone respecting, say, your same-sex relationship, I mean, it comes down to everything. That when I walk into a Starbucks and order a coffee, the person behind the counter is saying, have a nice day, sir, opposed to, do you want room for cream in that, ma'am? I mean, just at every moment as someone sees you, being seen for yourself is important. And I think that socially, probably that's what took Chaz so long to come out, was that he was afraid of the backlash, how it would affect his family, his own career. But it is relevant. It's definitely there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I kind of wonder, especially this day and age, when you see so many opportunities for people to connect, whether it's the internet, you have television and entertainment, and, you know, in some ways, and it's just my viewpoint, that it seems like, for instance, people who, you know, gay relationships, there's a sense of fashion celebration about that lifestyle, that young people who may not be that decide, hey, that looks kind of cool. I think I want to go in that direction there. And I kind of likened it to, like, say, like back in the 1950s and the 1960s with the, you know, the teenagers and the hippies. That this is a particular way that a young person decides to individually express themselves, that it is a fashion way of looking at life, but not a real way of doing that. What are your thoughts on something like that?
Again, I think that that's relevant, and I think that that is a natural conclusion. And in my own experiences with youth organizations for lesbians, gays, and transgender individuals, I met a lot of people who were heterosexual and not trans. That I've met straight men, not as many though, far more straight women that, yeah, see this, that the parties are fun, the clothes are sassy and interesting, the music's great, the parties are awesome, and they want to get involved. But I've never met somebody who could change their sexuality at will. I've never met somebody who came to gay pride and who was a straight woman that was able to choose to now be attracted to women. But I've met a lot of people who chose to be our friends and that they want to support us and they want to be involved. So that's been my personal experience with that. That, you know, the TV shows, I think it was years ago in the late 90s or early 2000s, Queer Eye for the Straight Guy was probably one of the first big shows on TV to embrace a gay culture and to want their perspective on things, or, you know, Ellen DeGeneres, Rosie O'Donnell. And, you know, these are popular people, they're famous people, and people want to be, you know, involved and are big fans. But, again, I've never met somebody who could change their sexuality at will. I think if that was possible, you'd probably have a lot more people who are gay and lesbian trying to be straight and be normal because it's easier to live that life than the other way around.
That certainly makes a lot of sense. And I was wondering, here was an interesting question, Luca, and it was asked by my wife last night. She says, honey, what would you do if I decided to become a man? And so it was the issue of unconditional love, so to speak. And I said, well, to be quite honest with you, I think I'd have a hard time with that just because. I mean, well, what are your thoughts on something like that? You know, because you hear this idea, well, then you really didn't love me, you know, if there's a change, especially something that dramatic. It's like, it isn't about whether or not I love you, but, you know, you're talking about something that's really extreme here.
Yeah, and I have this discussion with other, you know, trans people and acquaintances of mine that, you know, when you're dating someone and you decide to make this transition, you know, at a point in the relationship, and sometimes people get offended at how their partner reacts, and I've had to explain to them, you know, like Charlotte, she has stood by me and she's put up with a lot of crap from my transition, that even though when we got together I had already transitioned, there's still, you know, fallout from that for the rest of your life. I mean, it follows you. There's issues that come up. But if she were to transition from female to male, it would almost definitely be the end of our relationship. I would always be her friend and I'll always love her, but I'm attracted to her as a woman.
Right.
And for me, I identify sexually as a heterosexual male. So, I mean, I would like to think that I could be open-minded and stick by her, but I think that it would reach a point very quickly that I just would no longer be attracted to her in that way, and it would be uncomfortable for me. And I think that that's acceptable. I mean, the notion of unconditional love, I think that that's a beautiful, brave notion, and I think that it should 100% apply to your children. But when you have two adults that are in a relationship, again, you can't change your sexual preferences at will. And I know that maybe if somebody was bisexual, or a new term you hear now is pansexual, that these are people who are attracted to someone regardless of their gender or gender identity. But I don't feel that way. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that you can understand where I'm coming from, that, again, you've had a relationship with your wife a long time, you have a history together, but, you know, she started taking hormone replacement and growing a beard, that might be a deal killer.
I already have a problem that sometimes she shaves her legs with my razors. So.
There you go.
Now, getting to love and intimacy, one of the ways that at least I perceive or look at this is when it comes to love, and especially the way that you and your wife came together, the way that you had already made this change before you really got together. So pretty much she knew what she was getting. So it was just a matter of, could she decide, is this a direction I can go with my life? Could I be with this person? I look at love as soul to soul. Now, we'll go ahead and throw the Bible in here a little bit and go back to the story of Adam and Eve, which I believe is mostly metaphorical more than anything. And it's interesting how, especially, people pick up the Bible and think that it's an accurate account of the history of humanity. But I think it's, again, there's metaphor and probably some reality. But back to the idea of Adam and Eve is that I've always come to know God is love, and that God wanted us and mankind to be able to know what that love is. And the reason that we have man and woman was to create the duality so that we can come together and know love. But when you're looking at that context, it's from the ideal of soul, of heart. And, you know, to me, like with this story of you and your wife, that I think in reality, although we have a physical change in one, that is Eve to Adam, so to speak, you still have the element of coming together to know love. Has that been your experience?
Yes. I think the way that we feel about each other is very strong. It's very powerful, and it rules almost every aspect of my life. And when you talk about souls apart, but the purpose is to come together and bring together something that's different, that there are pieces of her that my life was missing. And I think that there were aspects in her life that could really only be filled with me. And as I, talk about a lot of things in my book, I'm very honest about a lot of dark periods in my life where I was into illegal activities, immoral activities. I was addicted to drugs. I was a functioning alcoholic for a while. And for some reason, when Charlotte and I got together, these habits dropped off on their own. That I found whatever it was inside that I'd been looking for, and she just brings me such inner peace and comfort, and a certainty that there is a purpose beyond this mortal toil of ours. Mm-hmm. And I never felt that until I was with her. And I feel that our marriage has solidified that too. I'm not saying that everybody has to be married to legitimize their relationship. I know a lot of people that are quite happy not being married later into age, but for me it just brought about such a level of commitment, that I wanted my life to be joined to hers, and that I wanted it to matter. It matters so much more than paper. That it's a commitment we share with each other, that we spoke vows, and it's changed me, and I'm sure it's changed her. Mm-hmm. And I feel better for it. I really do feel that she completes me.
Mm-hmm. How do you, for our listeners, do you define love from the experience that you have?
I feel, again, that it's made me such a better person. That her love of me, for us, a lot of trust is involved in this. And, from time to time, it's not that now I'm a perfect person. I still have my faults. But with her acceptance of me and acceptance of my faults, it creates, a level of comfort, a safety zone where I want to continue to be a better person. And, also the way that we feel about each other is very passionate. We're not like old people that just hold hands anymore. I just feel so deeply about
Let's
her.
go feed the doves.
Yeah, but, we would do something like that, too, because we do have old person hobbies. We like to go walking and bird watching and stuff like that. But, I feel a need to just be in her physical closeness. For a while, after we were married, I decided I wanted to be an over-the-road truck driver. I don't know why I got this crazy notion in my head, but I did it. I got my CDL, and I drove all 50 states. But within a few weeks, it became apparent that I need to see her every day. I need to be home. We go to bed together at the same time, and every night that we go to sleep, we go to sleep spooning, that I have my arms around her, and if I can't get home, she can't get to sleep unless I'm here to hold her. That it's emotional, but it is physical also.
What have been some of the, if you will, the negative aspects of your relationship?
Yeah, I don't think that the relationship itself is negative. I think that we're good people and we do bring out the best in each other, but for me, being trans, it's affected our relationship. I mentioned earlier that not everyone in her family knows that I'm trans, and that can create a kind of barrier where I don't feel it's something that we should be ashamed of, but on the other hand, we don't want to alienate her family. So I'm not sure that every couple goes through something like that. And also, when I was an over-the-road truck driver and in other areas, even if I just use the men's room in the mall, that she fears for my safety at times because I could be vulnerable. And, after writing this book and releasing it, we feared for our personal safety a bit. Because, people can be judgmental to a point of hostility. And I know we're talking about Chaz Bono, and I read his book, Transition, and I watched his documentary, Becoming Chaz, and something that was really alarming in his relationship was that when he went public with this, he started receiving death threats in the mail delivered to his home. And his girlfriend at the time intercepted a couple of these, and, obviously she freaked out because who wouldn't? And that was a very real fear for Charlotte and I. We had discussed that possibility before the book was released. That do we want to go forward with this? Because prior to the book being released, I was not open about my trans status to almost no one in our lives knew. None of her coworkers knew. Some of her family members didn't know, and almost none of our friends knew. A handful of my friends knew, but none of her friends knew. And it's because we didn't want to be judged. We just want to be accepted for, the people that we are versus who I was once upon a time. But a lot of this has had to come to light from the book. And then another impersonal, everyday interactions, being trans, I have a lot of trust issues. I have self-esteem issues. The prescription hormones, they can make me moody, and sometimes I just am unreasonably cranky, and it can peak out where I'm just filled with rage. And at least now, after years, I've been on these prescription drugs for about 14, 15, 16 years now, so I'm better equipped to deal with it. But early in our relationship, I was still a teenager when we were engaged. I think we were 18 and 19 when we started living together. And just like the anger, I didn't know how to manage it. I didn't understand that was what was making me angry. So we would fight more. And now, I still have these anger issues, but at least now I'm better at handling it, that I can just tell her, be like, I'm about to be really unreasonable. and this is why, so just ignore everything that's about to come out of my mouth, and I have to, like, yell for 5 minutes and get it out of there. And that was eye-opening for me, too, watching Chaz's documentary, Becoming Chaz, because I saw him and his girlfriend at the time interacting, and it was very similar to me and my wife. You know, there was a scene where him and his girlfriend were getting a breakfast ready for her family, and they're just trying to plate fruit and cheese and bagels, and he's freaking out because he doesn't like the plates that she's using. It's ridiculous and totally unreasonable to just really fly off the handle. And I saw that, oh my gosh, I do the same thing sometimes, that, you know, if there's a big crisis, I'm cool as a cucumber, but just for some reason the littlest things can really set me off, and that when you see it, it's just so hideous, this like side of you. And my mother always used to say, you know, that before I transitioned, I used to be so nice, and that she just wondered when her little angel would come back because I had such anger issues as a teenager. And now, you know, I see, because for years I wondered, is it just me? Am I just that big of a butthead? But now I see that, you know, it's probably a little column A, a little column B. It's probably a little my personality, but it also is this outside influence, and it can just create, you know, this storm in a relationship and in a household. But we work through it together, you know, that we've gotten to a point of comfort where she knows not to take it personally, and I'm better at recognizing it in myself when I'm being unreasonable. So there's apologizing that happens, verbal apologizing, you know, and at least now I'm a big enough person that I can do that, because it used to be I just had such fragile self-esteem I couldn't even admit when I was wrong. Mm-hmm. So these are just kind of things, you know, that maybe other couples don't go through.
Mm-hmm. So what does love intimacy mean for you? And, you know, obviously writing a book about this whole process, especially the relationship between you and your mother, I mean, being a teenager, especially in today's world, I don't think is any easier than it's ever been. But having been someone with your experience, you know, is definitely a leap beyond, you know, being kind of tough there. But define, I guess, if you will, what intimacy in a love relationship is, from your perspective and experience.
Yeah, Charlotte and I, we are intimate, and, you know, we're extremely physically intimate, but also the emotional aspect. And I think that maybe this is one of the positive aspects of being trans and in a relationship, is that trans men, it's been my experience, opposed to many biological men, that we are more emotional, and sometimes that can be a negative when it comes to anger, but it can be a wonderful positive when you're trying to be sympathetic to your partner's needs, that she's a woman, and I don't understand what it is to be a woman, but I certainly understand how it is to be treated as a woman. Mm-hmm. So, you know, she has needs. She needs to be complimented and, you know, reaffirmed, and I'm here for her. And when she has her complaints, you know, and her problems, that we work on things together, and I feel that our emotional intimacy has made us so strong as a couple, that we have a wonderful, open communication in our relationship, and we are just open and talk about everything. Mm-hmm. And that can be so important, you know. And when you have something like being trans, and I'm sure that this could relate to other couples that maybe have some kind of physical, not a barrier, but just something that they feel uncomfortable about themselves. You know, if somebody was handicapped in a way, or let's say that they've been burned or maimed or had a really gnarly birthmark even, that this can make you feel uncomfortable about yourself, you know, sexually when it comes to intimacy. And communication is such a great way to overcome that, you know, to get it out on the table and talk about it, so that your partner knows how to be respectful and how to treat you in a manner that you need to be treated, to make you comfortable and feel attractive. So that's our intimacy, is a lot of communication.
Mm-hmm. You know, Luca, I think about your story, and, you know, having been someone who knew you were uncomfortable in your own body as a female, you decide to become male. and then now you're in a loving relationship for 9 years now, as I understand it. Is that about right? 9 years?
Yeah, we've been married 9 years.
9 years, okay. First of all, congratulations. I mean, in America, that's like a gold medal standard. Even in straight relationships, that's very applaudable. And here it's 9 years, and you guys certainly have a lot of big hurdles that you had to overcome, I'm sure, just to get that far. But what is it? Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, I'm just agreeing with you. Yes, many hurdles.
Many hurdles. It's already hard enough to be a married couple in America, as it is. But to be married that long is just, I applaud you for that, definitely, not becoming a statistic, and we hope that doesn't happen, and the 1 and 2. But anyway, because it truly shows commitment, especially this day and age. I think the average marriage is about, 2.5, 3 years at best, first relationships, that is, and this is your first one. But what I wanted to ask you, because of your particular experience and the changes that you've made, now you're in this relationship, what do you feel? Do you feel that you have a deeper sense of emotional intelligence than, say, a regular straight person does? And it isn't to put that question in a way to say that possibly you're superior to emotional intelligence, but you've just had so much more that you've had to overcome and to learn and grow with.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Because I have been through so much, and Charlotte has been through so much, by my side. Yeah, I think that's a good point. There is, within the trans community, sometimes there is a stereotype that, to begin with, we're more emotionally advanced people. There's theories that, being trans can relate to, it stems from your brain. As Chaz Bono said, gender isn't what's between your legs, it's between your ears, and that makes perfect sense to me. And so there's a theory that, perhaps we use both sides of our brain more adeptly than biological heterosexual people, and that can give us a better understanding and an advantage emotionally. And I think that's possible, but again, because I've never lived life any other way, I couldn't say. I only have my memories of being myself. But yeah, I have overcome a lot, and some of it, in a way, almost everything relates back to being trans, because in my book I talk about, again, things that I've been beat up, I've been bullied, I've gotten myself into trouble and been arrested multiple times. I've even been locked away in mental institutions against my will a couple of times, and these experiences have all been horrendous, and I almost experience PTSD from them sometimes when I have to remember them. And in a way, for me, it all relates back to being trans, that I was getting in trouble because I was acting out, something that I couldn't verbalize. I wasn't getting the help I needed for the real problem, so I was masking it with other problems and trying to self-medicate and just ignore my life. And yeah, overcoming a lot of these challenges now, as I said, when there is like a legitimate crisis, I'm just so cool and collected about it, Like, wait until a plane crashes into the house and the whole thing burns to the ground before I'm going to get worried, because I just feel like whatever comes along, Charlotte and I will get through it. I have complete confidence in that, and I feel totally comfortable in our relationship, in that aspect, that we've just overcome so much that I can't see anything that could break us at this point.
Mm-hmm. See, and you take a look at the challenges of couples today, and usually one of the biggest reasons people divorce is money. And you think, depending on circumstances, it can seem extreme, but it's such a temporary situation, and really it's petty at the same time, that they don't seem to stay together to begin to increase, stretch, and strengthen their emotional intelligence as a couple. It's sort of like, I quit. I just can't handle this anymore. And, for you to go through what you have over the years and to be with someone like your wife who is by your side, and certainly she took a deep breath and said, well, let's move forward and see what life brings. It's as if the two of you have made a decision that is, not so, let's say, regular in today's world, of saying yes to life as it comes. Is that pretty much how it is for you?
Absolutely. And, financial troubles I can totally relate to other couples that can be a make or break situation. And Charlotte and I, we've had some really tough financial times. We've spent a lot of our relationship living paycheck to paycheck, and that just, comes from we started out together so young. Neither one of us had a chance to go to college, so we weren't really getting good jobs. Probably the lowest point in our relationship was she was working part-time and I was working full-time to try to put her through college. But I was only making $10 an hour, and at that point we were just so poor. I was selling my plasma twice a week for grocery money. Mm-hmm. And this went on for over a year, and I'm just exhausted, and she's exhausted, and that can really create so much stress. Mm-hmm. But I don't think at any point did we want to quit on each other. Mm-hmm. And I think that, these days, from younger people our age, down to their teens, up to people in their 40s and 50s, that there is, today, like technology, how we discuss the internet opens so many doors, and, if you're not happy with the person you're with, it's just so easy to walk away and find somebody else that you no longer have to look at your dating pool, what's at the local bar. You can get on these dating websites and meet people all over the world if that's what it takes. So in a lot of ways, there's not much incentive to stick at a problem and see a solution when, as a society, we've made it so easy to walk away from almost anything. Mm-hmm. But for me, besides the fact, it's not just my pride, that, we've been in it so long that we have to see it through. But for me, I can't imagine living without her. I wouldn't trade her for all the money in the world. I wouldn't trade her for anything. Mm-hmm. And I would rather live out of my car with her than live in a mansion with somebody else or by myself.
Mm-hmm. Now, I was going to ask Luca, and maybe call this a gift, hopefully, for our listeners. What advice would you like to give to our listeners from your experience about living?
Living life is such a gift. Before I transitioned, I felt that life was a burden and oftentimes a punishment. And especially when I was younger, when you're in high school and grade school, before you turn 18, you don't have much control over your life or decisions because your guardian adults, they make these choices for you. But once you get out on your own, life is what you make of it. And, certainly people have advantages over other people, that they come from money. Maybe they're able to go to college, get a better job, or, have something to fall back on. Charlotte and I, if things go wrong for us, if we lose our house, lose our jobs, it would be very difficult for us to move in with our parents. They don't have the money and they don't have the space for us. And they almost never have, really, for a long time. So we have that level of, we have to be there for each other, that we have to take care of each other and make this work. But not just financially. You can have whatever hobbies you want. You can be friends with whoever you want. Your day-to-day, whatever it is that you do what makes you happy. Mm-hmm. And that's up to you to find out what it is. But there are certainly people out there who are willing to help you along the way, too. If you're having a hard time, if somebody was transitioning, there's no reason to do anything alone anymore. And the Internet has opened up doors that we can communicate with people anywhere. You can get advice for almost anything. You can talk to people who have been through, similar struggles to see what kind of, to get a model of people who have been successful, who have had, healthy working relationships or working lifestyles, that have been through a similar situation to yours. And that is true almost no matter what your background is. But now we have access to other people, globally to see what works for you. Mm-hmm. But really for me, I'm just so happy Charlotte and I, our happiest days are together. We like to go out for walks. We like to go hiking. We love the Pacific Northwest. We like to go to the coast and go whale watching. And we usually pack a picnic lunch and bring it with us. That's our idea of a good time. We don't need fancy wining and dining. We don't need expensive first-class vacations. We just like being in the sunshine and being with each other.
Mm-hmm. sharing experiences, which is what Valentine's Day should be. And I always found it funny, is like in my own relationship, is that Valentine's, at least in the month of February, is that I started on the first day of February. And then Valentine's Day, maybe I'll do something for her, maybe I won't. But the fact is I've done it for the first 13 days. And that everybody focuses on that one day that I'm going to share my love. And the point being is you need to celebrate every day that you're with this person and not take something like this for granted, because good relationships, great relationships, they're just very difficult to find. And when you do find it, hold on, because you're in for a roller coaster.
Absolutely. Yeah, do not take the other person for granted. If you found someone that makes you feel good and that you really think you could love them, let them know. Let them know every day in every way that you can think of to tell them. Don't just save it for one commercial holiday.
Now, Luca, what has it been like in the world once you put the book out there, that takes a tremendous level of courage, knowing the potential repercussions.
Yeah. On the first page of the book, there's a small, notation that is titled Confession, in which I confess to the readers that Harvey is not my real last name, that is a pen name. My mother and I chose this together to protect us in a way that, publicly I'm available. You can find me on Facebook. I'm sure if you really wanted to go based off some facts that you'd find in the book, you could figure out my real last name and find me. But it was to protect my anonymity at work, that I'm not, a really famous author. I'm not a celebrity who doesn't need to work for a living. I have a Monday through Friday grind job like a lot of people. And I wanted to be protected from discrimination, as well as, as I've mentioned, I discuss things very frankly in the book that I've done that were illegal and immoral, and I would hate to lose a job over the person that I was when I was a teenager, versus the man that I am now. But we do, we don't just hide behind the pen names and stay in our houses. That my mother and I together or separate, and my wife Charlotte also, that we go to book signings, and we are out there at pride marches and rallies, and a lot of times, people come up and they ask us a lot of questions. People are very curious. Sometimes people are supportive, and sometimes people are negative. They're rude, they're hurtful deliberately, and they can be intimidating.
Mm-hmm.
It depends on the setting that we're at. My wife Charlotte and I, we were at Wordstock here in Portland this past October, and she was there at the booth with me. I was signing books, and at one point she left to go attend a workshop, and I was all alone. And it dawned on me that I was the only open trans person in the room. And, you're talking like a huge convention center room that I'm surrounded by thousands and thousands of people, and I'm representing an entire group by myself. And it felt very intimidating versus, if we were at a pride march, or a pride festival where there's tons of other trans people there, so I'm not the only one. And I just felt very small suddenly, and I did have a couple people, walk by and they look at the book and they kind of look at the cover, because their pictures on the cover are me. It's me as a small child. I'm a girl in a, pink ballet tutu, and the picture next to it is me in the tuxedo that I wore at my wedding. So they're looking at it and they're putting it together in their head. And I had one person tell me that that's just disgusting, walk away really huffy. Another person, while I was in the restroom, came up to my wife and told her that, she's married to just an evil, deceitful person. And these are people, they've never met me. They don't actually know anything about me. They just know one small thing about me. And I guess to a lot of people it's a big thing, but to me it is just a small part of me. There's so much more to me. So most of the reaction that we get has been positive. People are glad that we were willing to talk about this. They're glad that we put so many photos, personal family photos in the book. I think there's over 20 of them. My wife is in there, my mother's in there, and you can see the progression of my transition. So it opened, kind of people's eyes to it. But there has been some small negative reaction too. Mm-hmm. But so far we've been okay. No death threats yet.
Well, that's very good to hear, and it's interesting to realize, too, that you're creating a ripple effect, much like Chaz Bono did. Now, there are going to be people out there that just disagree with it, and that's a choice they make. But the fact is that you put yourselves out there with this story and this experience, that there are potentially many lives that you're going to be saving as a result of having the courage to do this. And you never know what miracles those saved lives will in time create, hence creating you an indirect miracle worker. Now, that's just one way to look at this. But you take a look at sometimes people who stand in the shadows, and they're the ones that can become very, very scary, and it's like, well, what contribution besides your insecurity or your potential hatred have you really offered to humanity to make the world a better place? And certainly, maybe again, there are people that are going to disagree with the life choices that you've made, so be it. Even regular, normal people make choices that other people just don't like. There's always going to be that element out there. It's just part of the human condition. But most importantly, it's knowing that you've made the world a better place with each step that you've taken through your story. And I think that that's one of those sides that you typically don't hear out there in those stories. They focus on the, well, that makes me uncomfortable. Well, that's okay. You're probably going to be doing things that make me uncomfortable. But let's see if we can find a way somewhere that we can be comfortable together to make the world a better place, and you've certainly done that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that feedback. And, we did have that in mind, my mother and I, when we went through this. Certainly we never thought that we'd be miracle workers, but we were very honest about a lot of things in hopes that if the right people came across this, that maybe there was something going on in their lives that they were afraid of or ashamed of, and that they would see this story and they'd be able to relate to it, and maybe they could alleviate some guilt, some regret for them, and free them up to try to move forward. That my mother, when I first came out to her, she was not comfortable with the idea, and she kind of wished that she could just close her eyes and make it go away. But she supported me, in the end, and I think that for a lot of parents it was important that they know that she had those hesitations initially, so that if they're experiencing them, they're not feeling guilty and just giving up. You don't want to give up on your child or a family member just because things are difficult, to begin with, that maybe you can move forward. And I was really honest about my drug addictions, my mental health problems. And very early in the book, I'm honest about a time where I was sexually abused by a neighbor. And these are things that were really dark and uncomfortable for me to bring to light. And I had dealt with a lot of shame over them over the years. But, if somebody else had a similar experience and they felt the same way, I really wanted to be the one to put it out there, for them. So maybe they could find some peace and solace with their own experiences after reading what somebody else has been through and been able to move forward. Because, gosh, we just do so much victim blaming in this country too. And it's not from outside sources either. It's that we're taught to blame ourselves. Mm-hmm. And that's not to say that nothing I've ever done has been my fault. Certainly I'm guilty. I've done plenty of things that were wrong, knowing full well that they were wrong when I did it. But, some things I need to be able to forgive myself, and other people need to forgive themselves. Mm-hmm. So we were really hopeful. And, I appreciate your questions, too, and your feedback. It's so poignant. And, I love the fact that you bring up what have other people contributed to society. Yeah, there's enough negativity out there. Maybe it's time to bring some positivity to light.
Yeah, and some color as well.
Yeah.
I remember I was watching a documentary years ago. It was called The Celluloid Closet. And it was about the history of filmmaking and the stories in the films that had to do with gay, lesbian, and even transgender people. And at the end of it, they said something to me that seemed so remarkable because it was so true, is that that condition or that way, these people, they tend to bring a tremendous amount of color to what almost sometimes seems to be a black and white world. And if anybody's ever been out there and they've had perhaps friends or acquaintances who, aren't the norm, they realize these are some very colorful, fun people. So,
oh, yeah. I have a couple of friends. As I mentioned, my childhood best friend is lesbian, and my best friend in high school, he's gay, and I just think that they're a riot. I love hanging out with them. I mean, you'd think that being trans, I'd have a lot in common with them, but actually sexually I have nothing in common with them. I'm heterosexual, but gosh, they're just the funniest people, and they're so creative and so talented. I love it. Yeah, I love my friends.
Yeah, see, but what they bring to the world is just that. They bring the humor, they bring the light, and it's like, how does that become a bad thing? I think maybe you might want to take a look at your beliefs or just go the other direction if this is a problem. So, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to be on our program today. Is there a website people can find out more about how to get a hold of your book, should they be interested?
Yeah, the website for the book is mydaughtermyson.com, and that's a great website. It has resources on it, not just for my book, but, if you're curious about transitioning and things like that or looking for some support. It also has our emails on there, so you can reach us. My email is lucaharvey@gmail.com, and, I do answer questions. I'm available. You can find me, my wife, Charlotte, and my mother, Betsy, on Facebook. There's Facebook page for the book, and then we also have public profiles that you can message us, friend us, say hey. And the book is available on Amazon.com, paperback or Kindle. And if you like it, please leave some positive feedback. If you didn't like it, I'd like to hear that too. And, the paperback is $20. The Kindle version is $7.49. If that's too much money for you, request that your local library carry a copy. I think that's the best way that, to make it available for everybody.
Mm-hmm. So what do you see for yourself in the future?
Yeah, my wife and I have discussed the possibility of writing a book, another memoir together. The first one, My Daughter, My Son, was written by my mother and I, and it was about both of our experiences with my transition. Where I transitioned so young, my mother played a heavy part in that. I had to have her support and also her permission. So she was really involved. But since then, as an adult, it's been Charlotte and I, and we were interested in writing another book on that. And, possibly there's so many other stories from within the trans community that I would love to bring to light and do, some kind of anthologies. I'd like to hear from people who transition later in life that have children. I'd like to have an anthology written from the perspective of the children and other partners to try and really create, community-based literature and get all of our stories out there. Not everybody has it in them to write a book that's 500 pages, but maybe they have it in them to write 5 to 20 pages. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of, right now, Charlotte and I, we're trying to make contacts and see if we can get that to happen. But also, this has been such a coming out for both of us. For me, coming out as trans with this book, that a lot more people know, my history. But also for Charlotte, where, as before, almost no one had known that she was the partner of a trans man. Now a lot of people know. So she's out there trying to make connections, and we're just here to support other people. That most of my journey and my transition is behind me, but a lot of people, theirs is in front of them. So we're here to help them now.
Mm-hmm. Finally, is there a Valentine's message you'd like to send out to the listeners?
Just happy Valentine's Day. I hope that everybody has love in their life. And that could be love of a partner, but I think that love of your friends is just as important and really fulfilling, and also, love of family and love of yourself. That for a lot of people, and for me especially, it took a long time and way past my transition point that I had my surgery at 15. And it wasn't until I was maybe 25 that I really even liked myself, and probably not until I was 30 that I was able to finally love myself. that's vital. So I just hope that everybody is able to find that.
Well, Luca, again, I want to thank you so much for joining us here on the program today. It takes a very courageous person to come out, especially in this world, to be able to take one step at a time and to perhaps be a positive influence for others who are just very uncertain about what their lives will be. And I want to thank you for being on the program to share that with us.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, and thank you for having me. I really appreciate and respect that this is probably not, normal for you to discuss something like this, and that you took a chance, and that you're broadening the horizons of your listeners and really letting me speak in a way that, you've treated me respectfully and very dignified, and I really do, from the bottom of my heart, appreciate that.
Well, thank you, Luca. That was very touching for you to say that. Yes, you're right. This is a first for me, but my horizons were pretty much always broad anyway. That's just the way my mother raised me.
Awesome.
Thanks again for being on the program.
Yeah, have a good Valentine's Day.
You too. We want to thank you, the listeners out there. Again, you can also find out more if you're interested. Just visit us at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. We do have our exclusive weekly updates there to find out more about anything you're interested in. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you again for joining us. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.